They don't talk about him much anymore. The other son. The first son. The one who was sent away with nothing but bread and water, cast into the wilderness to die. History remembers Isaac, the child of promise, the miracle baby born to aged parents. But what about the boy who was already there? What about Ishmael, Abraham's forgotten heir? In the grand narrative of Genesis, Ishmael is barely a footnote. He appears, causes trouble, gets expelled, and vanishes into the desert. End of story. Or so we're told. But if you look closer, if you really examine what happened in that household, you'll find something far darker, far more psychologically devastating than a simple story of divine favoritism. You'll find a pattern of rejection that echoes through every family, every culture, every human heart that has ever felt cast aside. The story begins not with Abraham's faith, but with Sarah's desperation. She couldn't conceive. Year after year, decade after decade, her womb remained barren. And in that ancient world, a woman's worth was measured in sons. So Sarah did what the culture permitted. She gave her servant Hagar to Abraham. "Go to my maid," she said. "Perhaps I can build a family through her." This wasn't love. This wasn't even lust. It was a transaction, a business arrangement to secure an heir. And it worked. Hagar conceived. But the moment she did, everything changed. The servant looked at her mistress with contempt. Sarah, the great matriarch, was suddenly diminished by her own maid's fertility. The power dynamics inverted, and Sarah couldn't bear it. She complained to Abraham, and he, in a moment of cowardice that would define his son's entire existence, said simply, "She's your servant. Do with her as you please." So Sarah abused her. The text doesn't specify how, but we know it was severe enough that Hagar fled into the wilderness, pregnant and alone, preferring death to further degradation. That's where the angel found her, by a spring of water, and told her to return, to submit, to endure. And he gave her a prophecy about her son. "He will be a wild donkey of a man," the angel said. "His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him." What a blessing. What a curse. Ishmael was born into tension. He grew up watching his father through the lens of a servant's son, always close but never quite chosen, never quite legitimate in the eyes of the household structure. For 13 years, he was Abraham's only son. Imagine what that meant. 13 years of being the heir, of learning from his father, of believing he was the one who would carry the lineage forward. And then Sarah conceived. The miracle baby, Isaac, the child of promise, the one God actually chose. You can feel the shift, can't you? The way attention reallocates, the way a household reorganizes itself around a new center of gravity. Ishmael was no longer the future. He was the complication, the reminder of Sarah's barrenness, the evidence of Abraham's willingness to work around God's plan instead of waiting for it. And when Isaac was weaned, Sarah held a feast. It should have been a celebration, but Sarah saw Ishmael mocking Isaac, or playing with him, or simply existing in the same space, and something inside her snapped. "Get rid of that slave woman and her son," she demanded. "He will not share the inheritance with my son Isaac." Notice the language. Not your son Ishmael, not even Abraham's firstborn, just that slave woman's son. Dehumanized, erased, made into an obstacle to be removed. And Abraham? The great patriarch, the father of faith, the man who would later be willing to sacrifice Isaac on an altar? He was distressed. The text says so. He loved Ishmael. But God told him to listen to Sarah, that the boy would be okay, that he would make a nation of Ishmael too. So Abraham did what he was told. He got up early in the morning, gave Hagar some bread and a skin of water, put the provisions on her shoulders, and sent them away. Early in the morning, before anyone else was awake, before Ishmael could ask questions, before there could be a scene, just a quiet expulsion, a silent exile, a father's hand on a son's shoulder one last time before the boy walked into the wilderness to die. Because make no mistake, that's what this was. Hagar wandered in the desert of Beersheba until the water ran out. She put Ishmael under a bush, walked away so she wouldn't have to watch him die, and wept. This wasn't a relocation. This wasn't a difficult but necessary separation. This was abandonment disguised as obedience. But God heard the boy crying. Not Sarah's prayer, not Abraham's distress, the boy's cry. And an angel appeared to Hagar and showed her a well of water, right there in the wilderness, that she hadn't seen. Ishmael survived. He grew up in the desert, became an archer, married an Egyptian woman his mother chose, and fathered 12 sons who became 12 tribes. The text moves on quickly after that. Ishmael appears one more time, decades later, standing beside Isaac at Abraham's funeral. Two brothers united in grief, burying the father who chose one and discarded the other. What did they say to each other that day? Did Isaac understand what had been done to Ishmael? Did Ishmael forgive? Or did they simply stand in silence, two halves of one man's legacy, divided by a promise neither of them asked for? This is where the story becomes universal. Because Ishmael's experience isn't just ancient history. It's the psychology of every displaced child, every overlooked sibling, every person who has ever been told they were loved, right up until the moment a more convenient option appeared. It's the trauma of conditional belonging, the wound of being chosen and then unchosen. You see it in step families, where children from a previous marriage are slowly edged out when new children arrive. You see it in corporate cultures, where loyal employees are discarded the moment someone younger, cheaper, more promising comes along. You see it in immigration patterns, where people are welcome as labor until they start asking for rights. The pattern is always the same. First, you're useful. Then, you're tolerated. Then, you're a complication. Then, you're gone. And the most devastating part? The one doing the rejecting always has a good reason. Sarah had to protect Isaac's inheritance. Abraham had to obey God. The new spouse has to prioritize the nuclear family. The company has to stay competitive. The nation has to protect its citizens. The justification is always there, always rational, always framed as necessity rather than cruelty. But the child sent into the wilderness doesn't care about reasons. Ishmael didn't get to hear God's promise that he would be okay. He just got bread and water and a long walk away from the only home he'd ever known. And yes, he survived. Yes, he became a great nation. But survival isn't the same as healing. Success isn't the same as belonging. The text says he became a wild man, his hand against everyone and everyone's hand against him. Of course he did. What else could he become? When the world teaches you that love is conditional, that your place in a family can be revoked at any moment, that you exist at the pleasure of those with more power, you learn to trust no one. You learn to survive alone. You learn that the only hand you can rely on is your own. This is Ishmael's legacy. Not the 12 tribes, not the great nation, but the psychological inheritance of every rejected child, every discarded person, every soul that has learned to expect betrayal. It's the wound that makes you self-sufficient because you have to be. The scar tissue that makes you hard because softness got you hurt. The defensive crouch that becomes your permanent posture because you never know when the next expulsion is coming. And here's the theological knife twist. God chose Isaac. Not because Isaac was better, not because Ishmael was wicked, but because that was the plan. The promise went through Sarah's line. Ishmael could be blessed, could become a great nation, could survive and thrive. But he couldn't be the chosen one. He was born outside the covenant, through human impatience rather than divine timing. And that origin story defined everything that followed. Some people are born into the promise. Others are born into the wilderness. And the difference between them often has nothing to do with merit, morality, or worth. It's simply the mathematics of selection. Someone gets chosen, someone else doesn't. And the unchosen spend their lives trying to figure out what they did wrong, why they weren't enough, how they could have been different enough to stay. But Ishmael didn't do anything wrong. He was a 13-year-old boy who loved his father and didn't ask to be replaced. His only crime was existing before Isaac, being born to the wrong mother, representing the wrong solution to the family's problems. He was collateral damage in someone else's story of faith. So when you read the grand narrative of Genesis, when you trace the line from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to the 12 tribes of Israel, remember the other line, the one that splits off into the wilderness. Remember the firstborn son who walked away with nothing but a skin of water and a promise he never heard. Remember Hagar, sitting too far away to watch her child die, weeping in the desert until God opened her eyes to see the well that had been there all along. And remember this: survival is not the same as justice. Being okay is not the same as being chosen. And sometimes, the faith that others celebrate is built on foundations of quiet expulsions, necessary abandonments, calculated rejections that we'd rather not examine too closely. Ishmael survived. He even thrived, but he never came home. And somewhere in that truth is every painful lesson we've ever learned about belonging, about love, about the terrible arithmetic of families that can only afford to keep some of their children. The forgotten heir, the other son, the one who walked into the wilderness and became exactly what the angel predicted, a wild man, his hand against the world, because the world's hand was against him first. That's the story they don't tell. That's the shadow in the narrative of promise. That's Ishmael, Abraham's other son.